Welcome everyone. Today we will do excellent discussions because we have our world famous speakers. I know everybody know about Mr. Marshall, Mr. Mark Sabin, and we have our famous speaker for climate change, Mr. Don. Uh, Definitely, we will discuss about climate finance, and this is very important. Uh, why this is important? Because personally, I know I'm from developing nations. 90% of our people, even the financial institutions, as well as many government body, corporations, even academy, they do not know much about climate financing procedures and everything. So World Talent Economy Forums, we are actually creating awareness, and I want to give thanks Mr. Marshall because how he's supporting with his team for World Talent Economy Forum. This is very important. And I believe that with this kind of excellent sessions, our developing nations, peoples, policymaker, they will learn more and they will apply it. And I'm happy that Mr. Marshall team is ready to support the developing nations organization. So I want to give chance first, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Sharif. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hopefully. Yeah, great. So we have today our team about mobilizing climate finance through a blended finance structure for all the developing world nations. And we are working together with the World Talent Economic Forum to bring this information to developing world nations so that we can achieve our goals of lowering the temperature, the global temperature, to 1.5 degrees centigrade eventually, and also to increase the population of the world nations, of especially developing world nations, and improve their lifestyles. Can we go to the next slide? So the issue of what we're trying to achieve in today's session is to talk about what's called pre-issuance credit enhancement guarantees. This is a pioneering blended finance investment, and it provides developing world countries with the opportunity to finance shovel-ready private-public projects. And there are plenty of shovel-ready projects ready to go. The second point we need to make is that pre-issuance credit enhancement guarantees leverage 10x the value when used to back climate bonds, fitting the decarbonization potential of the climate bond initiative taxonomies. Climate bonds are issued predominantly in the EU, and the reason they're a form of green bond financing, and we'll go into that a little later. We've talked about it in previous sessions, but we need to be specific why the climate bond initiative approach is the probably best recommended approach. And then finally, innovative credit enhancement solutions offer the key to mobilizing what came out of COP26 from GFANZ, that group of nations that committed $130 trillion in private capital earmarked to avert the existential threat of climate change. Next slide. Some of the key developments that have occurred, of course, we all know that global warming motivated 196 countries to commit to limiting temperature rise. Some countries, like the United States, backed out of it and then came back. The Green Finance and Investment Report estimated the need for 93 trillion US dollars in infrastructure investment over 15 years would be required at that time. That was 2015. And the green bond financing is a natural fit for low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure assets. The Paris Climate Bond blended finance concept introduced a credit enhancement framework to motivate expanded private capital investment, and that came about because of the pandemic in March of 2020. And then after that, at COP26, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, known as GFANZ Alliance, committed to manage that 130 trillion in assets in line with achieving the 1.5 degrees centigrade goal. What we've learned since then is the 130 trillion is probably halfway there to get it done in a timely fashion by 2030. Next slide. So one of the things we want to share with you is historically, the use of green bond proceeds from 2007 to 2018, and essentially up until the pandemic of 2020 hasn't changed that much. About 7% of the use of green bond finance proceeds have been through adaptation, and 3%, even less, through land use, 4% for waste, and you can see 11% for water. Transport is 15%, buildings 24%, and energy is not surprising at 40%. However, this dynamic needs to change. And what we are discussing today is the fact that if we act now, we can take a lot of the waste that we have and convert that waste from being dumped into landfills or polluting the atmosphere or polluting soils or polluting water, and convert that into a feedstock to actually improve water, improve soil health, improve the quality of life of people around the nation. At this point, I think what we need to understand is that the way to get there, the green bonds, especially the climate bond initiative, has formed a bridge to the SDGs. And I will hand this part off to Mark Sabin, who we heard from before about SDGs. And again, we normally would have Hina Shaw on this program discussing this because she's our considered expert in SDGs, but she is in Greenland right now doing some work on our behalf. So, Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Marshall, and thank you, Sharif, for hosting us today. So one of the issues that we have is, of course, how can developing nations solve the critical environmental and social challenges by leveraging private investments and protecting their fiduciary responsibilities? And one of the ways that this has been put into place is by using the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And what this mission actually involves is the 17 different ways in which the SDGs are used to deal with problems such as poverty and the problems that are happening with the water, problems that are happening with soil, problems that are happening all throughout the world today. And we need to be able to solve those problems. And they also become the metric for being able to use what the investments are going to be. So the mission that we're talking about today needs these public-private participation. The global impacts that investors who are committed to improving people's lives and the health of the planet also need the government participation to be able to scale these undertakings to the size that they need to be done in order to be able to actually address the problems that we're talking about. And what we're looking at is that we're really, at this point, we're looking to reverse the course of 262 years of industrialization. And in that, as Marshall said, there's a massive investment that is needed. And the innovations that are now in place to change the trajectory of climate change are actually now in the hands of entrepreneurs, inventors, and scientists. So the remedies are at hand, but they need the funding to implement their undertakings. And the financial mechanism to realize those innovative solutions has been put into place with the infrastructure-sized climate bonds that we're talking about. And where the SDGs fit into this mix is that in order to measure the efficacy and to reduce the risk both for the investors and for the projects, the climate bonds are requiring that the project tracks its performance against the United Nations SDGs, the Sustainability Development Goals. Now, one of the things that we've been involved with on our side, in the advanced resilient technology side, is that the transformation of these public-private partnerships that we propose actually far exceed the climate bond requirements, which is that we meet one of these 17 SDGs, but actually we are now meeting 14 of the 17 SDGs. And we do this by capturing and sequestering carbon, converting both organic and inorganic waste streams into marketable resources that can be used to mitigate environmental damage and turn some of these problems around. It represents a financially viable way to quickly advance climate repair. And moreover, these installations provide long-term environmental and social improvements to the locales where the systems are deployed. So we have global solutions in conjunction with local solutions by what we're doing by transforming waste, whether it's inorganic or organic waste, into marketable resources that then can help sequester the carbon out of the atmosphere, but then be deployed in the areas where the damage has been done to start to mitigate and repair the damage, which is part of the mission that we're about, which is climate repair and climate restoration. I'd like to turn it back over. Marshall, I think, as David has joined us, and I think David Smith was going to talk to us a bit about the public-private partnerships.
Sure, thank you so much for taking it there. As you mentioned so rightly, Mark, is that projects of this scale, you have to have a wide range of stakeholders involved in order to be successful. And particularly with the type of funding we're talking about and the involvement and commitment that comes with it. The task we're facing is a very complicated task with multiple systems, multiple levels there, and we need to put in place. So if you look at public-private partnerships, that is one of the best ways as we look at all the best practices to do this type of project. And there's many advantages to it. The slide on the screen outlines many of them because it promotes both the development of the project as well as it promotes the local activities as well. Many of the projects like this have the side benefit in that you end up employing a fair amount of local people on these projects as well. So it helps the local economy as well as the other things we're doing. It also increases the technology sophistication of what's used in the region often. And as you begin to bring the local people in and create that, you have a ripple effect in the community of increasing the GDP usually in the community. Um, it really begins to look at how the community sees itself. And one of the uh, side benefits of many public-private partnerships is that it promotes innovation, creativity across the region, and that it can have a ripple effect by doing this type of project, which is good for the environment. It becomes good for the economy as well, and it helps promote that. And public-private partnerships is a great way to do that. Uh, where public-private partnerships got their biggest use, at least in the United States, is in places where the public sector had budget constraints. For example, building toll roads. And that's where you see actually the most uh, P3s in the United States is in the domain of toll roads and other construction projects like that. So it's a great way to help lessen the public sector's budget constraints by involving the whole mess of stakeholders and other funding options. And it's a great way of sharing risk. But some of the other things that really are very important and fantastic feedbacks on this is it really is an elastic way, a scalable way of being able to handle the cost you have associated with these projects, the transparency of these projects. Uh, One of the challenges in many places around the world, and I'm including the United States, is that on projects of this scale and scope, there is oftentimes a lack of transparency. And by building the public-private partnerships, the P3s, and putting the controls in there, such as using blockchain and others like that, it increases the transparency. And that is a real positive benefit today, particularly as we are looking at this in a global environment. Uh, there was an interesting study done by USAID a couple years ago that looked at their international development projects with the percentage of money that was given that just disappeared. And it was a very high percentage. And public-private partnerships help manage that type of activities even a better way. But the other big benefit of P3s is it helps promote the entire community, the entire region. So, for example, we might have to work with community colleges or trade schools to help put specialized training in place that is going to be used across the P3. We might want to work with universities to look at a research project that solves a particular issue in that particular region. There's opportunities there. I can tell you most P3s I've been involved with, uh, you had entrepreneurs working around those, taking advantage of what you're doing with the P3 for starting new companies. You've had interns and others work within the P3s to advance the knowledge base. And the other side is, at least many of the P3s I've worked on, uh, you had government people and academia and education and funders working shoulder to shoulders on parts of it. So you create a relationship, you create a community that the public-private partnership builds upon that leads you to the ability to create these more rapidly to solve other problems than the initial P3 you're working on. So many, many different advantages of public-private partnerships. So Marshall, back to you, I guess.
Yes, thank you, David. So one of the things that we need to focus on now, and I'm going to hand this off to Don Carley, is, and that would go to the next slide, Sharif. The mechanism that we are suggesting that we approach is a blended finance approach using the GFAN's private investment through climate bonds and other blended finance structures. Don, I'd like to hand it off to you, and you can take the show. Go.
Sure. Thank you, Marshall. So thank you, Sharif, for inviting us. I have many years of experience working with large corporations like Xerox and Walmart, Unilever, on issues related to sustainable development and environmental social governance over the past 20 years. And perhaps the most important new development in sustainable finance is the development of more innovative blended finance structures. And by blended finance, we're really talking about the combination of both public, often called concessional capital, which could take the form of grants, it could take the form of low interest loans or guarantees, to de-risk the investments that private investors are willing to make through more traditional debt instruments, such as bonds. Public capital can be patient. Public capital can invest in the future and in infrastructure that wouldn't necessarily be attractive to private investors. Private investors generally are required by their fiduciary responsibilities to achieve market rate returns, and those returns have to be risk adjusted. So they won't invest simply because it's green. They won't invest simply because it's going to address a sustainable development goal, an SDG, or for that matter, climate change. They will, however, invest if those instruments, such as climate bonds, in addition to providing the benefits specifically linked to a sustainable development goal or to carbon removal or climate repair, if it also, through blended finance structures, provides a risk-adjusted return that is market rate. Now, that's the advantage. There is $130 trillion now allocated to make investments in appropriate debt instruments, for example, such as climate bonds. But the missing element is the use of credit enhancement, guarantees, and in some cases, grants, either through sovereign funds or multilateral development banks, or philanthropies, to provide risk mitigation at the front end of project development. And in doing so, that capital that's allocated for risk mitigation, for risk and credit enhancement, can be highly leveraged, can mobilize and multiply the effective value of those funds. So there are many different blended finance structures that have been established and used in both municipal bonds and in development bonds over the past 5 to 10 years. However, the scale of the challenge we face right now is of another magnitude. To put it in context, every year, the atmospheric concentration of global gases is rising. Human activities expel about 40 billion metric tons, 40 gigatons of CO2 and greenhouse gas equivalent gases per year. And most of that industrial disposal of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has taken place in the developing world. It has a disproportionate impact on in the developed world. It has a disproportionate impact on the developing world, especially those island and equatorial regions of the world that see a disproportionate impact of climate change affecting quality of life and life itself. So, in order to address that, great investment needs to be made in the developing world and in the equatorial regions. The bulk of that capital can come from private capital through climate bonds, if, and only if, concessional capital, credit enhancement funds, guarantee funds are provided through the multilateral development banks, sovereign banks, and philanthropies to leverage and access those hundreds of trillions of dollars of capital that will be required. Now, in typical blended finance approaches, the credit enhancement is applied to provide first loss protection to investors after the bond is issued. But what's needed now, in order to address this tremendous need for carbon removal, which will be required even if we were to implement investments in renewable energy to mitigate emissions in the future, you have to remember we have gigatons of carbon already in the atmosphere that have to be removed. There is no way to achieve the 1.5 degree Celsius goal or to meet net zero commitments over the next 10 years unless we make corresponding investments in carbon removal. And this is where blended finance innovations that emphasize pre-issuance credit guarantees become incredibly important and have precedent. So I think, Marshall, it might be useful. There have been some questions people have asked. Why is sustainable finance important? Why is green finance important? It's important because we face an existential threat due to that immense volume of greenhouse gases that have been expelled into the atmosphere over the past 100 years of industrial development. Now, people didn't invent the combustion engine, internal combustion engine, to kill people intentionally. They were attempting to make things better. And we can't have blame, that says, well, you did it intentionally. But we can now use new sustainable finance models using blended finance structures to liberate private capital, providing them appropriate risk-adjusted returns that are also addressing, through project finance, carbon removal. Biochar is one of the available means ready to go that can address carbon removal at scale. And we need to do this now, not in 10 years. So what's going to be required now will be some innovation, even in blended finance, looking at new structures, new vehicles that employ variations on the Paris climate bond concept, in which the capital provided by the public partner or the philanthropies in a blended finance structure can be continuously recycled and applied to yet additional projects to get them implemented at scale. So I'll refer you to a really landmark innovation in blended finance concepts that was developed at the time of the 2015 COP, called the Paris Climate Bond concept. It's a relevant precedent to the structures that ART is advancing, which shift emphasis increasingly to credit enhancement that takes place at the front end of the development process prior to the issuance of the bond, to provide an enhanced credit rating to a special purpose vehicle that's created to implement the carbon removal project. Once that bond is issued, the credit enhancement, which is typically in the form of a guarantee, is and can be backstopped with additional surety bonds to prevent downside loss for the public partner, then becomes released, and the bond proceeds to market, providing risk-adjusted returns to private investors through normal bond mechanisms that will be necessary to scale to the challenge. So we can't do this without sustainable finance. And with these notions of credit enhancement guarantees and in some cases grants at the early stages of project development. Very different from investing in companies now. We're investing in projects. So Marshall, I think you might want to take it and speak specifically about the framework that's being advanced at present with regard to pre-issuance credit enhancement processes.
Thank you, Don. Excellent explanation of the process. Of course, it's a lot to take in one session. So if anyone is interested, please contact Sharif or myself, but preferably Sharif, and we can get you this slide deck to look at. And we can also get on calls to talk to people to bring them up to speed on this. What we are recommending to pursue right now, and we are pursuing this, is what Don has very clearly stated, the pre-issuance credit enhancement. And the process is up here on the slide, is showing phase one, in which the guarantor, in this case, in the developing world, should be a financial institution or a bank or a development bank or a multilateral development bank or a central bank of a country, in providing a sovereign guarantee. And the process that it starts out with is we get what's called a non-binding conditional letter of intent with a proof of funds. And typically that is, if that was done with a private enterprise or a private bank, that's what they would show, is that they have a set of a set of funds that would set aside to act as a guarantee, a credit enhancement guarantee for the project. The project typically requires a joint venture, or as what David has described as private-public partnerships. In the developing world, these are the best method of bringing the projects to table. So we're talking about under the waste management taxonomy of the climate bond in Europe, and I said I would speak to this. The climate bond is the only green bond that is rated by Morningstar, Fitch, and others. The other green bonds have not received those significant ratings, and there's a reason. And the reason is the Climate Bond Initiative, put out by the European Union, creates very stringent taxonomies. Taxonomies we described in the last panel discussion as rules of the road that tell you what is needed to be done in order to assure that you accomplish what the bondholders seek, and in terms of climate mitigation, and that there is no what's called greenwashing, meaning that you're saying one thing and doing another. You need to do what you're going to do, and there needs to be full transparency. And as was described earlier on in this panel, lots of technologies, artificial intelligence, and different technologies to track this, to keep everything on level, is doable, and we can do this. In this case, you're seeing the guarantor issues a conditional letter of intent with proof of funds To the right, you see that somebody issues a loan provider, or a line of credit, could be a line of credit. And typically the amount, it's dependent on the quantity of the bond. So right now we're in the issuance process of issuing a 500 million euro bond for projects, for joint ventures that are not in the EU. They're actually outside the EU. They're in the Western Hemisphere currently. The 7 joint ventures together require, not based on our assessment, but based upon the analysts at the Climate Bond Initiative and some of the banking institutions, they say that we are required, in order to get to scale rapidly, we need about 500 million euros as the bond issuance. So typically a guarantor will put up a guarantee of 50 million euros, 10% of the value of that. They don't move the money out of their accounts. They keep it in their accounts. And the reason that is done is because it provides, as Don indicated under the Paris Climate Bond Protocol, the ability to issue a credit enhancement. In other words, you get a credit rating for that period of bringing the bond to market. Once you have the bond to market, then you do have another credit rating from the bond itself. So the beauty of this process is, by going through the Climate Bond Initiative, climate bonds under the taxonomies, and they have taxonomies for waste management, agriculture, cargo shipping, green building, and now they're even developing one for hydrogen. And previously, from 2007 to 2009, most of the green bonds that were issued had to do with energy, as you saw in that first slide that we showed up there about the breakup of where green bonds are used. And especially in solar arrays, or solar energy, or wind, or even hydro power. But now, because of the climate crisis and the acceleration of the climate crisis, as Don pointed out very graphically, we need to act now. And if we don't, we're all going to be in trouble. And the best way to enhance this is to work with the developing world banking systems, to get the credit enhancement in place and risk mitigate it to the people who are acting as the guarantors and whoever provides the loan. In our case, on a 500 million euro loan, which is not an insignificant amount of money, 500 million euro bond, a 50 million euro credit enhancement guarantee is issued, of which 7.5 million euros, it acts also as a backstop to about 7.5 million euros, which is required to structure the joint ventures legally for the climate bond and to get that acting. Obviously, the first thing we did was we put together the joint ventures. And what we're doing now is we're looking at Malaysia, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and other countries, also African, sub-Saharan African countries, to form those joint ventures, to take the waste and convert that waste into products that will improve soil quality, clean up water, provide some energy to the local communities, and at the same time, improve the quality of health of people and prevent zoonotic diseases, by the way, especially in livestock. So there's a lot of benefits to this process, and we need to put together the guarantee with, let's say in Malaysia, with a Malaysian bank or a central bank, and get a loan provision out of it. And then hold on, Sharif, don't go. You got to go back, and then we risk mitigate that through what's known as a surety bond. That's confusing. Surety bonds are using the same term as a climate bond. A bond is a debt structure. A surety bond is not. A surety bond is essentially a similar form of insurance that says we will guarantee the line of credit, and we will also guarantee a payment back to the bond to the guarantor of what's called an accommodation fee, which is allowed in the EU structure. So the bond guarantor, which would be a bank or a financial institution, let's say in Malaysia or whatever country we're operating in, and that answers the question, which country provides the green finance? The finance is structured as a as we talked it as a blended finance. So it sounds a little complicated, but it's actually straight up. The guarantor is the country, are the banking institutions of that country, but the money, the funding comes from institutions that acquire the bond itself in the Luxembourg Green Exchange, in the LGX. And the Luxembourg Green Exchange is oversubscribed in climate bonds. Why? Because all the people that want to show that their environmental, sustainable, and governance attributes for their bondholders, for their shareholders, and for their stakeholders is in alignment with the world mission to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the temperature to 1.50, they're acquiring these bonds. It shows they're putting it on their balance sheets as a debt structure, that they're going to get a good return on investment, as Don pointed out, but it's going to be blended with banking to act as the credit enhancement. Now, the great news here is this approach does not put the risk to the bank or the country. And the joint ventures have to be public-private partnerships that are transparent. And one of the things that is important about this is that as you do this, you're reducing risk and you're mitigating risk. The bond comes to market, the risks go away for all the players, including the surety bond providers. And what happens is the bonds get implemented through the stringent taxonomy. Now, the taxonomy we're proposing to start off with, there are lots of taxonomies that we can use with the Climate Bond Initiative, but the one that we propose to begin with is taking sewage treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants, landfills, everybody that has waste of a certain nature. We can clean up that waste and convert it into better quality water, better quality soil, better quality air quality through this process, and follow the rules of the EU Climate Bond Initiative, which is the most stringent in the world that we know of today, and allow us to get carbon sequestration moving. One of the processes we do that with our enterprise and our joint ventures that we form is to take what is called pyrolytic carbon capture and storage technology, together with ultra nano bubble technology, together with Zajac engine technology, together with a EnviroProtect antimicrobial technology. We blend these technologies together to get these results, and we quantify them, we measure them. Under the Climate Bond Initiative, you need to measure everything you're doing. And if it doesn't work, you got to say so, and you've got to show so. And that's what's beautiful about the climate bond. The Climate Bond Initiative has stringent rules, and though they apply only to Europe currently, by getting this into the public realm in Europe, we are actually funding Malaysia, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, all the third world countries that need this, especially the countries in Africa. So this is the process that we're going to. And Sharif, you want to go to the last slide? Thank you. So this is the contact information. I highly recommend that you reach out to Sharif, Rana, who we are partnering with in this presentation, to get going and act now. We don't have time. Time is of the essence, not because I say so, because the world knows. All the climate scientists from COP26 have indicated the science is in. It's not fake science, it's real science. We have to act before 2030. If we don't, the climate clock, which is in Union Square of New York City, is counting down. We don't have a lot of time. So now I will hand it back to Sharif, and we can take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is really great session. Really great session. That is the things actually we are looking for. Long time We are working with many developing countries, and they have a problem, especially when we work with government side, especially it's a public-private partnership from Malaysia and Bangladesh. We know there is one of the successful project is uh, uh, in between Malaysian and government, and this is handled by one of the Malaysian corporations. Uh, I think the chairman name is Professor Sabrina. Definitely, she going to join in World Talent Economy Forum. It's a Jill Mill project, $1.8 billion projects. It's happening right now in between Malaysia and Bangladesh. So this is one of the successful projects in Bangladesh and Malaysia. Other than that, I'm sorry, there are many confusions for this public-private partnership. This is important, as well as the climate bond. This is very important things, and even you see that our audience also learning from the discussions. Uh, Different developing nations, Mr. Marshalls and other people we know, we just finished our dialogue with Malaysian climate change departments for this public-private partnership in Dubai Expo, as well as we finish our dialogue with Rwanda government for this public-private partnership. Uh, More government, even we have our School of Talent Economy. I want to welcome this kind of session through School of Talent Economy because we have many students, especially from government and from corporation. They have to learn these things. Then when the awareness comes, naturally we focus on educations. Then we can develop the projects. And from my personal experience, because long time I work in the industry and academy from the developing world, and definitely they are the largest, like United Group, uh, Tata groups, and Summit groups, and these are the very largest in the developing world. In Malaysia, Sunway Group, they are also one of the largest. I think we need to create more knowledge-based relationship, like today's session, because maybe there are more opportunity, but the developing world, they do not know much. Even there are a lot of frustration because the local corporation, they do not want to take more initiative. They said, okay, we expend too much of our time and energy and everything, but we do not get the result. But I believe you are the right people who has the knowledge, who has the strategy, and who can help to apply this knowledge in developing world. So definitely, we are actually providing training different government bodies for this public-private partnership. So we want to invite you more this kind of session, and especially for the training program. And definitely we will apply these projects as well. But from the audience, there are some very basic questions, and I feel these are also very important. Let's say Onika Sham, this is the problem because we need to discuss more why green finance is significant in the modern world. I think Mr. Don and other speaker who want he can respond. How important is sustainable finance? Uh, Reality is that in the grassroots level, 90% people, they do not have enough knowledge about sustainability. We have to work hard. Yes.
I think they have knowledge. They may not know the name, but they know the effect.
Okay. Yeah.
The fact is that climate change is only one of the existential crises that the world faces as a consequence of over 100 years of industrial development. Biodiversity loss, desertification, wildfires, COVID-19, climate change impacts such as sea level rise. These are all concomitant problems that industrialization have created in conjunction with increasing the availability of food and transport and other aspects of modern society. So it has a dark side, right? We're coming to realize that we face these existential threats, tipping points of no return. If people think we are not yet experiencing climate change, we are already experiencing the negative impacts of climate change through increased severity and occurrence of storms and sea level rise and desertification and so on. And we don't yet have a 1.5 degrees Celsius atmosphere. We're at 1.2 degrees Celsius. So it's already bad. And even if you go to the initial slide that Marshall showed about the direct what climate bonds have been applied to, the majority of climate bonds have been applied to climate mitigation strategies, meaning renewable energy that emits less greenhouse gas emissions than traditional fossil fuel energy. But simply investing in mitigation is no longer sufficient to prevent the kind of existential no return crisis that a 1.5 degree or 2 degree world will subject us to. In order for that to happen, the world has to also remove carbon from the atmosphere. Remember, we're talking about 50 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent gases being dumped into the atmosphere every year at this point. 50 gigatons. 50 billion tons of carbon every year. It's accumulating. It stays there for 500 to 1,000 years. So if we want a future, the reason sustainable finance is so important, the reason in particular green finance is so important, is that we have to direct capital from private investment in bonds that are not looking at environmental issues necessarily, to bonds that provide similar risk-adjusted returns, because that's what fiduciaries require. A pension fund can't tell its investors that it's going to be an impact investor and deliver climate benefits, but at a lower rate of return. They have to have the risk-adjusted rate of return market returns. By creating these taxonomies that the Climate Bond Initiative has, and ensuring that there are measures for verification of the climate impacts, and if those climate impacts are not delivered, that there will be penalties to the bond issuer. The private investor, the pension fund, the sovereign fund that has to have a risk-adjusted return that's market rate, can satisfy their bondholders. They can satisfy those needs of the bondholders, while at the same time meeting impact investment objectives, allowing for the improvement of quality of life, for mitigating the degradation of ecosystems, of arresting biodiversity loss, and through measures that combine concessional finance, in some cases grants from multilateral development banks as a small part of it, combined with sovereign guarantees that say for the period of time that there may be risk on the project because it is not yet in the ground and operating and producing the benefits, we will provide mitigation of the risk to those bondholders. But once it's up and running and proven, then that financing can be redirected to a new project, giving the sovereign fund or the nonprofit that's providing that concessional finance leverage 10x, so their money can do 10 times, have 10 times the impact.
Excellent.
Another
Marshall.
aspect of that we should address is the nature of what we're talking about by the transformation of waste into resources. Because one of the things that has plagued the environmental works and the workings of sustainability is that it has not generated a financial return that was at the level that it needed to be in order to be able to inspire the investors to put their money into these types of projects. And one of the things about using waste and converting waste, transforming waste into usable resources that can be used for a host of different environmental and other projects and other materials, basically becoming a new resource for the manufacture of other products and other uses, has turned this into something that is now profitable for the investors. So their incentive is increased because they see not only are they being able to do good in the world socially and environmentally, but they're getting an adequate financial return to make it worth their while.
To build on that, impact investing, sustainable investing has typically occurred at the margins. It has not been the mainstream of investing. Mainstream investing is primarily concerned with risk-adjusted returns at market rate or better. So who's going to invest in the communities that have to flee the Bangladeshi coastline? Who's going to invest in the rainforests that are being lost? Who's going to invest or pay for the thousands of species that fall off of the red list? Who's going to pay for Madagascar? Or the landfills, not the landfills, the dumps rather than the landfills, that in some cases are emitting millions of tons of greenhouse gases a day as the organic waste putrefies, decomposes in those landfills and escapes into the atmosphere. That methane that escapes has 23 times the greenhouse gas effect of carbon dioxide. So the concessional funds, the multilateral development banks and the sovereign banks have to look at public interest. They can look beyond profit. They also are concerned with returns. They are also concerned with deficits. But if they can provide leverage, if they can provide the short-term upfront guarantees that allow small ventures, special purpose vehicles, not just big corporations, to invest in projects that materially remove carbon from the atmosphere, that implement clean energy, clean water, smart agriculture technologies, then they benefit disproportionately in the South, while it's the North that is paying for it through private capital invested in climate bonds that provide them with a good return, but oh, by the way, are also addressing the sustainable development goals in the developing world.
Don, that is brilliant. Thank you very much for that explanation. I think one of the takeaways, Sharif, that we want to share in this session, and then we will continue it in the next session that we do, and I'll explain what that is. But the one takeaway that I think is important for all the people that are watching today is that we didn't invent the wheel here. This financial mechanism was created by the European Union Council and the European Union Parliament. And I got to give credit to the former German Chancellor, who by background is a physicist and understood the scientific method of climate change, and she surrounded herself by that. I'm talking about Angela Merkel. And one of the things that we know is that they came up with that because of the climate bond came out of the 2020 process of the pandemic in March of 2020. They realized that they were going to do, not named after me, but named after the World War II Marshal, the Marshall Plan of World War II that Eisenhower and General George C. Marshall propagated to recover Europe from World War II. And they're doing the same thing now to recover Europe, but the benefit of this is it also brings about the benefit for the developing world. And we, together with you, Sharif, want to focus on the developing world to let them know there is light at the end of the tunnel and we need to act now. And the beauty of it is we're not inventing the wheel here. The mechanisms exist. As you saw from Don's component of this panel, the Paris Climate Bond Protocol exists. Prior to that, he talked about the blended finance structure and the mechanics of it. And we have the mechanisms to actually implement it together. We know it can work. We know it will work. The next part of this, which is today, was to bring about the blended finance approach. What is it financing? It is financing the carbon sequestration, the improvement of soils, the improvement of water, the cleaning up of water, all the environmental issues that need to be done to get people off the dime or off whatever currency you're using, to make sure that what you're doing is able to address the issues of climate crisis. And to do that, I just want to say one more thing, Don, and that is that the next session, we will all talk about the joint ventures that are required. And those specifically is what David spoke about, the private-public partnerships, which need to be joint ventures between enterprises such as ours and the governments that are controlling the waste, such as
and local governments and local entities on the ground,
right.
both
100%.
small businesses and enterprises together. So an example would be a waste management company that today is hauling municipal waste could become an integral component to bring the organic waste to a biochar pyrolysis facility. The public partner would provide the necessary permits and guarantees. A local nonprofit entity that's impact investing might provide grants to do project design and feasibility studies, or pre-verification of the validity of the project from a climate repair perspective. A company like ART brings enabling technology, proven technology for converting biomass to biochar, which then has a value beyond the cost of the input waste. The waste becomes valorized through this process and can be used to address water eutrophication, harmful algal blooms, regenerative farming practices, as well as carbon removal, a critical component in the race to net zero and to achieving the 1.5 degree centigrade targets that the Glasgow agreements have set.
One other important thing, though, too, to build up on what both Marshall and Don are saying, is as we look at, as Annika asked, why is green finance significant, and why are public partnerships part of it, is that we can approach the whole green finance on a local issue, as Don just mentioned. But what really needs to happen, particularly in parts of the developing world, is you probably want to do public-private partnerships across nations, where to have any impact of scale, you're going to probably need to reach out and do it across multiple nations to get that scale.
The Caribbean Basin is an example of that.
Yeah,
The CARICOM nations have done that.
CARICOM is a great way,
exactly,
as a model to look at that.
Yep.
I was involved with actually the first meeting to establish the Caribbean Common Union there. And as we put that in place, it's that leverage of scale. It's these type of public-private partnerships where you can cross boundaries with it for
pool
the
risk as
for
well.
the not just risk, Don, but it's to benefit the region, to benefit the citizens, to benefit the government, and in this place, benefit the planet.
Absolutely.
I think another example that was brought by Sharif between not just the Caribbean nations, but also specifically to between Malaysia and Bangladesh. By joining forces, they can both leverage one another, and if they use the climate bond approach that we bring to the table, they actually have, as you pointed out, Don, the North pays for it and gets a return, but the return also cascades. That return is cascading in many fashions. Most people think about what's my return on my investment. But if you take what we call the triple bottom line approach, not only are you going to get a measurable return on investment financially, you're going to get a measurable quantitative return on environmental impacts, especially in the countries that both David and Don talked about, like the Caribbean, or as Sharif talked about, between Malaysia and Bangladesh, and especially in Africa as well. So all the developing world has an opportunity to get on board now and take action now with this team here to be able to deliver on a climate bond approach that risk mitigates the countries that are involved, whether it's the Caribbean, whether it's the sub-Saharan Africa, or whether it's the Asian area. Every developing nation has an opportunity to take advantage of this, and it will be measured, and it will be monitored, and the money will not disappear. It will be used in a fashion to actually enhance, create good quality jobs, which is the third level of the triple bottom line, which is a social impact return. The social impact return speaks to getting better quality jobs. That was the original concept of the triple bottom line company out of Purdue University back in the 90s by this professor. I can't remember his name, but that came up with the concept. But we've added other legs to that. We say, let's improve not only the return on investment financially, not only the return of lowering environmental impacts, but also increasing the quality of life issues on the social scale, giving people opportunities to live a decent life, allowing their children to go to school, allowing people to eat quality food, and at the same time get health care that is required for their standard of living, and reduce, important enough in this subject matter at this very moment in time, on the 5th of January of 2022 in the new year. Here we are worldwide in an ongoing pandemic. Now, people don't connect the dots necessarily, but pandemics are usually zoonotic diseases. A zoonotic disease is a transmission of a disease between species. And a lot of zoonotic diseases happen to occur when you eat things or eat animals or eat plants that transmit those diseases. The material known as biochar, if it's formulated properly, can reduce the mortality rate of all kinds of livestock and chickens by a minimum of 50%, reducing the likelihood of a zoonotic disease in the food chain. Now, the zoonotic disease we have currently is not transmitted through food; it's transmitted through the air. But even that is affected by quality of life issues, and it's all connected. So I just want to share with everybody that the next session that we will talk about is how do we actually do this? What does a joint venture look like in the private sector? And what does a joint venture look like in the public-private sector? And again, this team will be back with hopefully some of our other team members to discuss that are implementing these things.
Excellent session. Even though like a few months ago I was really worried because where I born in Bangladesh, maybe it will go underwater. It's in Rajbari and it's near a Padma rivers. So I believe that if we have a team like that, maybe I can save my land. Uh, Even if it's actually millions of people concerned. And that's why we developed this World Talent Economy Forum. We need people like you. And how I see personally, even I'm sure our audience really impressed by today's session. Uh, Maybe we can offer more session like this, Mr. Marshall. Uh, this is the things we are looking for. This is the things we are actually uh, want to work, especially the developing world. And in this way, if we can create awareness and if we can do the jobs and we can develop the projects, I'm sure at least 30 different countries from the developing world, they will join with us and they will work with us because they need solutions, they need support. When I can remember, like I shared with Mr. Marshall years ago, like two years ago, when I last visit a waste management project, I can remember the people were really worried if automation comes, supply chain comes, and new things come. So I lost my job. But I'm very happy Mr. Marshall committed to us that no, these people will not lose their job. We will train them. They will get more salaries. And that is the thing. That is the things actually major concern of the developing world. So I believe developing world, they this world is very potential because I helped to grow different corporations. I can remember Bangladesh economical development last 10 years. It's not from 20 or 30 years. Last 10 years. In front of my eyes, even I grow many large corporations like United Group. We build up university, hospital, power plant, everything last 10 years. So that is the beauty of developing one. In between short period of time, if you have the right kind of team, if you have the right kind of strategy, you can solve many problems. So today's session is excellent. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with your government, with your corporation, with your academy. We want to do more work with this team, Professor David Smith, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Don. I'm really impressed by your presentations, Mr. Mark Sabins. This is actually excellent sessions, and hopefully we will take some action. Action is important, and definitely we will invite more banks and more government people for this kind of dialogue, and then we team up together and we can solve the problem together. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I directly want to
Pleasure.
go for the concluding remarks. I want to give chance Mr. Marshall first.
Thank you, Sharif. Thank you for having the opportunity for our team to discuss this opportunity. It is an opportunity. It's an opportunity not just for us, it's an opportunity for the developing world. It's an opportunity for the developing world to become enlightened, more sustainable, and at the same time create a quality of life for their people. One of the takeaways, there's three takeaways from today's session that I would leave us with, and that is, number one, we have a mechanism for the banking institutions in each developing nation's country to step up to the plate, be risk mitigated, and help us bring climate bonds from the EU through a blended finance mechanism to the table and get going. The second bullet point or that I want to leave you with is time is of the essence. Not because I say so, but the IPCC has stated in its last environmental report that time is of the essence. If you don't believe in the science, then don't worry about it. But then your children and your grandchildren won't be able to live a good quality of life. We need to act now. It takes time to ramp up. To give you an example, were we to get a bond through a private-public partnership this year, let's say in Malaysia, as an example, even if we got one today and had the funding, it takes anywhere between 6 to 18 months to get going. Why 6 months? Because if you have a certain type of waste, we can get it taken care of in 6 months, but it's not at scale. To get it scaled, you need about 18 months maximum to get the technology in place, the people trained, commissioned, operating, and the financial mechanisms to operate so that we actually can make a viable impact that is measurable environmentally. And the last impact, I would say, is again, not only are we going to generate a good return on investment, both for the developing world and for the backers of the climate bond in the north, but we're going to lower environmental impacts. But the third element I would leave you with is we will make a very definite impact on the quality of life in the developing nations. That has to happen. This pandemic, which is a threat and has caused tremendous harm and death around the world, can become an opportunity for those that have survived to survive by implementing this approach. If you join with us, we ask that all you do is contact Sharif, get in touch with us, let us discuss how best to approach this, and if you believe in these three outcomes, we will succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks?
Well, all the speakers today have hit it right on the line as we go. This is an issue that is on the forefront of every country in the world today as we look at it. Funding has always been a challenge for this scale of project, and oftentimes many organizations do not understand the benefits of putting together well-structured public-private partnerships where it has benefits beyond just the project itself. The other point to remember here on projects like these is you want the project to be able to sustain itself after implementation. And that is why the upfront planning, the upfront involvement of a public-private partnership contributes measurably to being able to sustain these projects after the base project is completed. So I'd encourage your listeners if this is in the realm of where they would like to approach, to please reach out to you, Sharif, and begin the dialogue.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Mr. Mark, what's your concluding remarks for today? Can you unmute, please? Mr. Mark, can you unmute, please?
Have to be off mute, don't I? So, yeah, my last comments are that any investment bank, any developing bank, any country in the developing world that is interested in participating in this is certainly looking to have the investment scrutinized appropriately. And one of the things that is so important about what these climate bonds enable them to be assured of is that these sustainable development goals of the United Nations, which address so many of the issues that are facing the developing world, are being addressed. And one of the things that the project that we are talking about at Advanced Resilient Technology is that we address 14 of those 17 sustainable development goals. And that's critically important because that means that not only are we measuring everything, as Marshall mentioned, that everything is measured, the social impact, the environmental impact, and the financial impact are all measured, but they're measured against a standard that has been created by the United Nations in effort to support all the things that we're talking about addressing the global issues of climate change and all the other issues that affect the developing world, because we have this inequity that has been in existence now for so long, and we need to be able to bring some of the resources that come from the West into the developing world to begin to bring the world back into balance, both environmentally, financially, and also socially.
Thank you. Mr. Don.
Thank you, Sharif. Well, I think it's important to remember that of nearly hundreds of millions of people in the South, in developing nations, still lack electricity and clean water, or water. And 80% of all of the greenhouse gas emissions that have created these consequences are from the G20 countries. Investment in the South needs to be made. And blended finance provides the mechanism through public-private partnerships for that capital flow from private capital in the developed world to the developing world to occur. We have at present put most of our energy, most of our investment globally into renewable energy and things that try to limit new emissions. And the cost of doing that has typically been out of reach for the developing world. They've been forced to say, but we have to burn coal because that's all we can afford. We can't afford renewable energy. But the point is they can. Through blended finance innovation, they can. Through proven carbon removal technologies, like biochar, they can address the climate crisis, improve their quality of life, and shift this incredible imbalance in the distribution of benefit from industrialization to all of the world and not just to the developed world.
Excellent. Excellent sessions. Mr. Marshall, thank you for arranging this kind of session. We want to offer more session like this. We need to discuss like this kind of things, and we need to go for more open dialogues. We need to go for more networking sessions. We need to arrange more conference like this because this is very important. I'm sure that there are many confusion even after COP26. Even for me today, I completely understand what will be the procedure. Even my friend, those who working for different government and the corporation, they even they attend in the COP26, they have confusion. They say that no, the developed world has always give lot of commitment, but it's a difficult procedures. It's never happened. But I believe team like this, Professor David Speed, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Mark Sabin, and Mr. Dan, they can solve this complex problem. So we need to work hard. I believe that there are many problems around the world you can solve, especially West. Definitely, it's a very big problem. So let's work together. Let's rebuild this new world, and I'm sure through World Talent Economy forums, we can solve many problems. Thank you for this excellent sessions. I'm really impressed by today's dialogue.
You're
Thank you.
welcome,
Bye bye
Sharif.
and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.